So that's why the mix knob is important. Hello everyone, I'm Black Marvin and I'll be your substitute George for today. As you might know, I created Carta, which is a content bank for Kilohearts, but it's actually more than a content bank. Carta is a map and there's some secret sound design knowledge hidden inside it. And today it's time to start revealing that knowledge. Today I'm going to show one of 3 techniques that I used during the creation of Carta. This video is going to cover a technique called Snapstacking. And it basically consists on stacking multiple instances of the exact same snap-in inside an instance of snap-ep. This is great to create some flavory effects. And once you save them inside snap-ep instances, you can then bring them back anytime you want during your sound design process. And you'll see that this is very friendly for anything that is atmospheric sound design, ambient, pads, all that kind of stuff. And now, without further ado, let's spill the beans. The first technique I want to show, I call it snap stacking. And it's basically stacking snap-ins inside Faceplant. It's a technique that you can only do inside Faceplant due to the way it's built. So as a starting point, what I have is a sample from Carta called Granular Voice. And you can find it in the Dark Voices folder. I also have a little loop here, and the reason why I'm not using the granular generator inside Faceplant, because trust me, we could have some really good result with the granular generator, but Carta was done in a pre-granular era for Faceplant, so I just thought that it would be more accurate if we go in the style that Carta was done. So it sounds like this. Now we're gonna get an instance of snap-ep, and we could do this in this first lane. Everything that I'm gonna do, we could do this in this lane, but for reasons that will become obvious eventually, it's much better to do it in snap-ep. So I got my snap-ep now, and I'm going to do a couple of examples of snap stacking, but I think the first one and my favorite one is going to be with phaser. So we're gonna start by adding 1 phaser. Because I don't want to alter the stereo too much, I'm gonna fold this to 0. Now this is what I have. It's already cool. Let's see if we can move a bit the cutoff, the rate, the depth to just get a slightly more noticeable phaser effect. So that way is just even more noticeable. And I think it pairs well with the feeling of loop that we have from our source. Now this is where the stacking begin. I'm on PC, so I'm going to do Control, Select, then drag and drop. And I'm going to do that 4 times, but I'm going to play the result in between each step. So we're starting to get a very watery and peculiar sound with that effect. And that's what we want with this technique. We're almost pushing the sound to a point where it gets destroyed. Not in a practical way, but in almost like an aesthetic way. We really want to push and destroy the sound. And if you push enough, you'll be surprised how many new territories you can get with this. So we're at 4 phasers now. I'm going to continue pushing. We're not going to start moving parameters yet, but let's continue. We're at 5 now. Let's try 6. So we are at 6 phasers now. 2 things I'm going to start doing. First, I'm going to start assigning some macros on parameters across all phasers to see if I can get some kind of super reaction while sweeping all these parameters at the same time. And the second thing I'm going to do is I'm gonna start trying to automate or just modulate some parameters in with LFOs, random modulators. We'll see about that. But first, let's dive into the macro assignment. So this one, I want to assign it to the cutoff. Usually, by the way, the first macro in anything, I really like it to be either a cutoff macro or just something that can really articulate the sound well. And usually cutoff do that very well. I'm going to switch this one to bipolar. The reason why I choose bipolar is you can see that the cutoff is already midway. So I think it's going to just make more sense to have it in the middle so I can go lower or higher. I'm going to assign this one and see how it sounds. So it's at 40%. Now let's do the same thing to all cutoff. All right, let's move this bad boy. So you can hear that the result is some sort of steppy and watery result, which I really dig. I'm gonna rename this macro. So when you look at Carta, it's very texture heavy, texture based, and that cutoff modulation, it gives a nice texture, and I think it's gonna be a good tool to have in my toolbox. Now I have a macro. I want to try automating some parameter. I say automating, but really it's modulating, but I'm gonna use some modulators. I'm gonna bring in a random modulator. Usually as a starting point for this type of modulation, I like to start with 16 on 16. And I want to have the smooth all the way at 100%. Bipolar, I think is going to be fine. Now let's see what it does if we assign it to rate. So one thing that is different right now, the cutoff, I literally copied the exact amount of modulation, right? But you might have noticed that for this one, it's different. Some is on a positive value, so it's going a certain direction, and other ones are in the opposite direction. So it's literally, while some rate are accelerating, other rates are slowing down. And I think now that this difference in between all those phasers, it's starting to make the texture a bit more complex now. Now let's see how it sounds if I move the cutoff with all that movement that we added. The last thing I'm gonna do for this phaser stacking is I'm gonna just make a macro and assign it to trigger, either random modulation on or random modulation off. Probably going to have it on most of the time, but it's just nice to have that on-off switch as a macro. In order to do that, I'm gonna select that macro and just get all those yellow equal signs. So you can see that this way there's no random modulation, and if I engage this now, it starts to move, and I'm probably gonna keep it that way most of the time, and this is why I'm going to save it that way. Saving is very important because when you get a nice recipe, you want to save it into a Snap-E preset. Gonna save this one as phaser stacking 1. Now let's get out of that Snap-E. And what's cool is now we are left with this. So we have our preset, we have the macros that we assigned. And now what we're going to do is try to apply this to other sources and see how it reacts. And you know what? I'm even going to get an LFO here, put it in bipolar, and move the cutoff just on a regular, it's going to be more fun to preview these examples with some movement on the cutoff. So yeah, you can see this is a really nice. I could have also saved it under the name of watery texture. So I wanted to start with this one because it was really like stacking and stacking and stacking the exact same instance of phaser. So I thought it was a really good demonstration for the stacking process. Now I'm still going to use this technique, but I'm going to give it a different twist. I'm going to bypass this one and I'm going to get a new snap heap. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a frequency shifter. And I'm going to start to shift those frequencies. Already it sounds cool, but really something very, very cool happened when you start to play with the mix. So we're going to have both the frequency shifted signal and both the original signal. Now the stacking begins. We're going to stack multiple frequency shifters. I think 4 is going to do well. And the difference between the phasing process, now I'm going to pick a different frequency point for each shifters. If you don't mind, this is a really cool, almost like aura and texture voice, but might not be the best suit for our example right here. So I'm gonna take something more tonal. Okay, so I have this tempo gong here in D sharp. And now I'm going to start to bring that mix up. Gives some sort of shiny result. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna play with those frequency shifters and try to get a more coarse reaction. So you can hear it changes the sound, and so far it does not sound too dissonant, because you can do that in a very dissonant way if you work with texture. So it's good for atmospheres that doesn't require a sustained tone, sustained note particularly. But so far this one seems to preserve the integrity, I quotation mark, but preserve the integrity of the source fairly well. And now I'm going to do the two same things I did for the other one. First, I want to get a macro that moves everything at the same time. And I'm also going to apply some randomness in there. Now for the macro assignment, I'm going to go faster because you've seen the process one time. Gonna do the same thing. Okay, so I have this one. Now I call it movement, and it creates some sort of frequency sweep. Now you might see this and be like, okay, this is cool, but how does this operate in a real life or real sound example? I'll show you soon. Now I want to program that a random modulator that I talked to you about. So same settings, 1616 smooth 100%, and I think I'm gonna go once again for a non-equal modulation, so unique for each of these. So I'm gonna have 3 macros in this case. This one is going to, like the other one, trigger the randomness on off. And the third one is going to be the mix here, because you'll see that in this effect, it's actually very important. And in the bigger picture of a preset, this is going to be important as well. We're gonna demonstrate that soon. So I'm gonna go ahead and do this one. And I did the mix here. So I have movement, random, and mix. Perfect. Now let's save this one. Call this one diffractor. Could also been frequency stacks, but sometimes it's nice to have a little flavor. And even though this is not mathematically the same, this process sort of reminds me like of the diffraction pattern on lights. I think to my ear, it sort of sounds like some sort of diffraction. But anyway, that's why I use this diffractor. I think it sounds badass. Now, how do we use this in the big picture? Like I said, so we have this tempo gong. This is very good for atmospheric stuff, pads. Now we're gonna add a reverb, because this is going to pair well with a reverb. Gonna have a longer attack since I want this to be a pad. And now I'm gonna start to play with this diffractor module. So that's why the mix knob is important, because, sometimes less is more in this case, but to have just a bit of that stacky movement on those frequencies, it creates that weird, almost like ghostly atmosphere that you can layer on the original sound here. But now let's take a couple sources and see how it reacts. Now I'm gonna go out of Carta sources a bit, but let's see. Those factory, this is going to be really well strings, those factory sample source from Kilohearts. Actually this, that's what I'm looking for. Those weird stuff that you can create with, it's a guitar string, but now that diffractor movement here, it just creates that weird steppy computery stuff. But you can see we're starting to lose a bit of power, but don't worry. I have a solution here. We're going to insert multipass and go with the NOTT preset that I love so much. And now we're beefed up again. So hopefully this sparks some inspiration for you. And one thing I really like also about that process, well, I think it's possible due to the Kilohearts ecosystem, but if you take a look here at the bottom, well, it's might be dark a bit, but it's 2.90 milliseconds of latency. So for something that we stack, it's actually, it's very, very light on the CPU. So that's something that is really cool as well. And that's it for this video. If you currently run the Kilohearts subscription, you already have access to Carta. And what you can do now is just pull up some presets, and through the means of reverse engineering, you can now investigate and learn even more, because like I said, Carta, not just a content bank, it's a map. And if by some mystical reason you're not subscribed yet to the Kilohearts channel, Even though it's not my channel, I think it's fair for me to advise you to subscribe to the Kilohearts channel. There's lots of great content coming up about your favorite plugin ecosystem. And until then, I'll catch you on the internet. See ya. We are inside Faceplant once again, and I'm going to show you a multi-layering technique for generators. Can create some really cool result. We'll see about that.